I have a tinge of arrogance in my voice and in myself that really comes out when I'm having arguments with people. And that arrogance was not always there. I remember exactly how it came into being for me. We'll get there, but first let's look at what it is. For me, this arrogance is that I'm making a more rational argument about something than you. This need to be rational, to have rationality, to rationalize away. Of course, rationality is healthy, where appropriate, but not all things are rational. Some things are more emotional. Some things there are lots of gray area and not the cut and dry, yes, no, black, white rationality that has become so prominent as the thing that we should aspire to have, even though it doesn't really reflect the reality of most of our day-to-day lives. It's an ideal we tell ourselves to be purely rational, which means that we can rationalize away our worst decisions. There's also the transrational, that which transcends rationality, but because it isn't purely rational, looks irrational. I mean, it is irrational in the sense that it's not purely rational, but it's not silly, it's not stupid, it's not nonsensical. It just simply cannot be understood by a purely rational brain. So there are other ways to be, but rationality is the order of the day. And for me, I can remember being in high school and having political debates with my friend Travis, who at that time was a card-carrying Republican. He was a Rush Limbaugh listening Republican. Later in life, he changed his ways. After he went to college and met gay people, I believe he told me, and then realized, wait a minute, gay people aren't bad, the way the right has told me all this time. Of course, now the right pretends that gay people are tolerable, if not just okay with you and me. But in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, not the case. Whether you cared at all about someone's sexuality tended to fall along political lines in America. And, they still do, but not as dramatically as before. Unless, of course, there's just homophobia lying dormant and waiting to rear its ugly head again, which, of course, is possible because we see that happening with race and with sex. So there you go. But back then, Travis was super smart, articulate, had a great memory. I mean, still does, but he used it for Republican purposes. He was a conservative. And so my thinking was really more my empathy and my feeling coupled with things my parents and especially my dad would tell me that I couldn't really retain, like facts about Reaganism and how Jimmy Carter really was as compared to how he was portrayed by the right, and all of that sort of stuff. I had empathy for human beings, right? I had empathy for people and animals, of course, but we're talking about people. I had empathy for all people. I mean, from really young. I mean, I don't think I ever really lost that. Probably until I became arrogant. But so my dad's knowledge sort of fed that feeling, that gut feeling for people. But I didn't have the memory that Travis had, so I couldn't really retain the facts to battle his facts. All I had was, well, I know you're wrong, and I don't know how you're wrong. I can't articulate it. I just know you're wrong because I'm a liberal. Because my dad's a liberal and he told me, And so I would try to appeal to him on more sympathetic notes, on more like, but wait a minute, aren't you just a human being? Like, you don't really feel that way, do you? But that wasn't enough for him. So In fact, one of his favorite quotes from Rush Limbaugh was something along the lines of, "Even when I'm wrong, it's really a brilliant swerve towards truth," which I thought was funny. But I think Travis took that to heart a little more than I did. But the great thing about Travis is he was my friend, and so I wanted to win the argument. I wanted to show him that he was wrong. And so I learned facts. I learned about the very things my dad was talking about and more. I read books on, not just politics per se, but on punditry, on the media, on how the media is not of the left, because this was always the big sort of, the media is, we still see this today, right? The media outside of Fox News and Wall Street Journal is liberal, all a liberal organization. But what was true about that is that the reporters themselves may have been liberal. In fact, the editors may have been liberal, but the corporate overlords that own these media outlets had an invisible leash on the editors. And so the topics about which you could liberalize were limited in scope, and everybody knew their role. So you could be as liberal as you put a liberal slant on a topic, but the topics are dictated by right-wing corporate interests. So most of these conversations we have in politics are nonsense, are nonsensical, at least back then. Now, of course, there does come a point where things are so obvious in your face bad that they have to be talked about, or the illusion of free media and caring go right out the window, right? But this is not where we were back then. So I did my book work and I did my learning, and I came up with the facts to counteract him. But of course, those arguments, I don't think those arguments really did anything for him in terms of opening his heart and mind. It really was that he was a music theater guy, and he went to the Hart School of Music, and like I said, he met homosexuals. And so in relating to them outside of the realm of facts, quote unquote, and news versus fake news, or liberal news versus conservative news, was the fact of who these people were in his life now. And they were just like you and me. They just slept with different people, with same gender people. Like, that's it. So all the demonization he saw firsthand was wrong. And because he loved his new friends, he couldn't subscribe to that old prejudice belief system anymore. He just couldn't do it. And it opened his eyes, I think, to all of the other problems of selfishness and prejudice, which hold us back in the realm of politics. So it changes outlook completely, this relating to people, this heart connection with people. In a weird way, he came around to heart as I was coming around to brain, right? So if I look at why it is that I have a tinge of arrogance often when I get all irrational, it comes from emulating Travis, because my personality, not so much anymore, but was very chameleon-like. I would, people's traits would rub off on me, and Travis was that type of arrogance. And, not just people's traits, but I'm good at doing impressions, not just literal impressions of people, but of what we might all suspect is their inner monologue, which may sound a little bit different than their actual outer voice. And I think these things rub off on me, or they did. And so that was a characteristic of Travis that I have carried forth in me, for worse. I was going to say for better or for worse, but for worse. No offense, Trav. So it's just there. This vestigial personality trait back when I was more malleable. But where does that need to be rational come from? That need to be quote unquote right, correct, and to argue for it at all costs. I mean, I do think that now, I don't know if it's worse or if just my seeing this in Travis colors it to feel like it's worse now, because here was an example of someone who could break through that. But now it does seem like harder to break through, to allow interpersonal relationships to influence your thinking beyond what it is. And maybe it is harder now because we are more of an indoor, isolated, on the computer culture. And of course, we now have legitimate right-wing media. And then the same old mediocre pseudo-left media controlled by corporations on the main stage. Now, of course, there are progressive outlets and all that, but they're not the main stage. The main stage is from the middle to the hard right. And people seem to be in lockstep on that hard right. So if they're not out meeting people to test what they're being told on the TV and on the internets, how can they really know? So that may be a legitimate issue. We need more relating in this world. I mean, that's what it is. We need, at least in this country, we need more relationship with one another. And that's not always going to work, because I remember in college, in high school, I had this tight-knit group of friends who were great, and we would have these great, amazing debates and discussions of things that, you know, if John Hughes put it into the Breakfast Club, you'd be like, well, even that is a little bit beyond their years. No, we were having those discussions. We cared. And the same thing held true for freshman year of college at the University of Bridgeport. After that, I went to the University of Hartford, and it was not this way, but at least at the University of Bridgeport, the same sort of thing happened, where we would all get together, a whole giant group of us, and talk about things that mattered in the world, not just in our little social lives. But I remember this one kid, he was sort of a right-winger from a right-wing family, and he was very uncomfortable with all of this. He sort of hung out with us because he had no choice. It was a very poor college. There wasn't a lot to do except this or drink. So if he was going to be in the social circle, this was it. But, you know, he was not comfortable with it. I could tell he wasn't comfortable with college life, and he just wanted to go home and be isolated and hold on to his prejudices and be that guy. It was very clear. So it's not going to work with everyone that relating to people breaks the mold, but it often is the case. I think more often than not. If we're willing to meet each other, to not simply meet another with the image that we have preconceived about them, but to meet them and really see what they're about. But this need for rationality, this push for rationality, is itself a prejudice, because it says that everything that is not itself is wrong on some level. This is for the purely rational person. Of course, we need rationality. There are things that need to be rationally hashed out. Not everything is trans-rational. Not everything is a heart relationship. Some things are just, the brain is there for a reason. It has a purpose. Rationality has a purpose, but it's not the end-all, be-all, and we are out of balance. And part of this is due to patriarchy. You can go down the list of social things. But what is it personally in our lives that keep us here? Because no amount of patriarchy can really do it. In the same way that, like, I never drank growing up. And when I found out that my dad was an alcoholic in college, that was a great excuse to continue not to drink. But the fact is that I just didn't like it. I didn't like the taste of alcohol on any level. And I didn't like the way my friends were when they were drunk. Nothing about it was appealing to me. So that means that beer ads never worked on me because I didn't want them to. So there's got to be a level of your own complacency for these things, these social messages, these subliminal messages, these advertisements. For all of these things to work, you have to allow them to work. You have to want them on a level. And so it is with being a purely rational patriarchy. We're all in this together until we aren't. Until we see that. And then the seeing that has its own action. So let's see this. Let's see if we look together. I mean, you look in your own life. I'm just talking about my journey. Boy, do I not like that word anymore, but my journey. And you look at your own journey and see where you're at with all of this and why. If you're a purely rational person, of course you may not be. You may be a flake, or you may be trans-rational, or a babbling idiot. Who knows? I mean, any number. Or you may be balanced. You may be coming more from heart, which informs the brain, as opposed to coming from the brain, which blocks out the heart. Perhaps you've gotten that far in life, and good for you. Or perhaps you're of a heart culture that never left it, and great for you. But for some of us, we have to see that there's a need to get there, and then see where we are. Because the seeing where we are and understanding it is the getting there. There is no running to that other thing, that heart culture, that other expression, because the running to it creates a friction between what you are and what you want. And so you then cover over what you are with what you want. You become a smiling, happy, flake, or a cultist, or a poser. I'm not going to grow a man bun. I've said this a million times. No man bun for this guy. So if I look at another reason to be super rational, arrogantly rational, right on every issue, for me, it is my involvement in what you would call the paranormal and or alien abductions. These are the common words we use for the things that you know what they mean. So we don't have to bother getting into those, except to say that because I would talk about them, and I would talk about certain high strangeness experiences in my life, I didn't want to be laughed at. And because I'm the guy who would make jokes about such things and would be completely irrationally, probably cruel to people, I would probably make jokes at people's expense about these things. Had I not had them, had I not experienced them, I would be that guy, that jerk. I know who that jerk is, because that jerk is me. And secretly, I kind of wished I could just be that jerk and not have had these high strangeness experiences. Just make fun of them. Well, thankfully, now I get to have my cake and eat it too. But see, there's me being arrogant again. I wanted to prove that I am a rational person who happens to have irrational things happen to him, but that they are real. And the proof that they are real is that I am a rational person. It's circular. I don't have any real proof. I don't have physical evidence. I only have me. And so if I could show you that I am sane and rational just like you, if I could show that I have a quirky, cynical, I would guess at this point in my life, I would argue sadistic sense of humor. I think that's what Gen X morphed into. We went from cynical, sarcastic, right into its kissing cousin, sadism. If I could prove that I am that guy who just happens to be having these experiences, well, then by golly, you would know that I am sane and that these are real. So that was, first it was Travis honing my abilities to be rational, and then it was the need to prove to you that high strangeness experiences are real and valid. But really, if I look at both of those things, the underlying unconscious truthier truth here is that I wanted to prove my dad right. My dad was right and Travis and his dad were wrong. His family was wrong. It all goes back to protecting the parents and seeing them as perfect, as perfection. So that was honestly why I wanted to be a good liberal. Not that I didn't feel that it was correct, not that I didn't really have the empathy that I talked about before, but the driving force to win an argument such that I would buy books on political subjects, I think the spark of that came from the unconscious desire to prove my daddy right. So that's inner child me coming out. But then with the high strangeness thing, if I'm really to be honest with myself, I wasn't trying to prove the high strangeness stuff right. I was trying to show that I am sane, that I am a critical thinker, that I am rational, because I need to project myself. Again, this goes into the episode we did on ambition here. It's this ambition, this drive to be heard and to be accepted. And I thought I could even be president one day. I mean, my narcissism knew no bounds. So none of these reasons really had to do with balance or being a good person or even being correct. It all had to do with image, with how I'm perceived by other people, with not wanting to be rejected, wanting to be embraced, and not even necessarily for my own sense of personal self-worth, in the sense that at that time, too, I was also a very depressed person. So I don't even think acceptance would have taken me out of my depression. I think I would have found other ways, other means to feed that depression, and to say I'm a piece of crap. I'm certain. And in fact, I would even use that you believed me against you or against me. And I probably would have even used acceptance as a sword against myself. I would have lashed out at the people accepting me and said, gosh, if you accept me, what's wrong with you? Because I'm not worth accepting. So I think on the level of my own personal depression at the time, which I had in spades, I would have taken the positive and turned it negative. So my wanting that positive wasn't about feeding me and making me positive or building me up in that way. It's about something even subtler than that, even more unconscious than that. The wanting to be perceived as rational is purely about wanting to exist in this world. The self wanting to exist in this world by the world's rules. When you play by the rules, you're acknowledged as worthy, and then you can say, I am. And this wanting to say, I am, is the self's way of playing God. And this is the most basic, rudimentary way. I mean, we do it in all sorts of grandiose ways, right? But this is and we do it on different levels all the time because we're constantly needing to not necessarily feed the ego in an arrogant, egomaniacal way, but sustain the egoic self, which is an illusion. And it's an illusion that is only sustained in a quote-unquote healthy way by outside validation. It's sustained delusionally internally when, in a quote-unquote unhealthy way, when you don't have contact with other people or you only listen to your splintered off multiple personality voices internally. But we claim that the healthy way to go about this is to be validated by people who abide by the normal conditions of the society, the normal standards of society. This is not healthy either. But in the world of duality, going by the rules, you could do worse. If you acknowledge rules, you can change them, you can update them, you can downgrade them, you can swing on the pendulum back and forth between good and bad decisions. And that's okay as long as you have the chance to realize that you are on a pendulum and what that is. If you're stuck in your own head and you don't realize there's a pendulum or other people in the room outside of what's in your head, well, that's a little harder to overcome. But, yet again, I digress. If I look at what motivated me, and I look at what motivated my hero in the political journey, my father, they're different things. My father was far better equipped to argue politics and social justice issues than I was. Of course, he was an adult and smart as a whip on these very issues, and quite outspoken. But they also served as a mask for him, for his own personal demons. Again, not that he didn't believe in them and doesn't believe in them, but being a social hero was a way to avoid being a personal hero. A lot of these social activists and socially active people and psychologists are screwed up people. They do well for other people, but not for their own families, not for their own personal. It's a way to deflect, which isn't to negate the good that they do in the world. It's simply to say that they're doing good often has personal baggage or is a means to not look at themselves and to receive accolades. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that with him. I think his father, at least in the family, was outspoken, but in from what I understand, sort of a crazy, angry, perhaps schizophrenic way. I'm not sure. So there's that internal chatter that we were just talking about. But, I mean, I don't think he was outspoken in any public way, and certainly I think he, probably his political views were completely interlaced with whatever anger issues he had in life, and with how he was made to feel about himself as a Greek immigrant. I think politics at its worst is all about selfishness, greed in terms of wealth and hoarding, land, development, all that stuff, but also in a more personalized way, the selfishness of emoting and projecting what you feel onto other people, and even through policy. Similarly to what we were just talking about this entire episode, similarly to my journey, but in a cruel way, in a cruel external way. I mean, if mine is an internalization, an unconscious attempt to sustain myself in society through knowledge and empathy, then my grandfather on my dad's side would be sustaining his sense of self, or sustaining it in this society by pleasing the abuser, by adopting the bullying stance of those who would see him to the border rather than welcome him into their home. Right? I mean, immigrants chanting, "Build the wall." Right? This would be my grandfather, most likely. He'd be one of the ones chanting, "Yeah, build the wall. Let's keep out those immigrants." And not understand the hypocrisy, because he had turned his anger on himself. He believed the propaganda about himself and other immigrants like him, and he wanted to identify with the winners, with power, with the people who pick themselves up by the bootstraps and move their way up the hierarchy, the American dream, and all of that. There are people who identify with that, and people who see through it. And he identified with it. So, therefore, he ended up hating himself, and the easiest way to sustain himself, I guess he unconsciously believed, was to support the people and policies that were not in his best interest, but helped him to identify with the bully. And now that I say that, isn't that why I wanted to appear rational to a rational culture about high strangeness phenomena? Because I didn't want to be bullied by them when I spoke. So I guess we're not so different, are we? And isn't that why I wanted to school Travis so badly in facts that I couldn't remember? So I learned the facts anew, or I relearned what I had forgotten. Anything to win the argument with Travis, to show him he's wrong because I'm so certain I'm right. And that pushed me toward being a rational brain person, out of heart and empathy and more into my head. But then the high strangeness thing, that was more in line with my grandfather. That was more in line with wanting to appease the abusive culture, the people who would laugh at me, to get them before they could even do it. To show them, see, I'm just like you. And this was a tactic I took with bullies as far back as grade school, which is if somebody would make fun of me, I would make fun of me first, or I would make fun of me in a follow-up joke and one-up them. That way it wasn't so fun to make fun of me because I didn't fall for it. You can't laugh at someone who's laughing at themselves. Then you're both relating to each other. You're both in on the joke. And, if their goal is to hurt you and hate you, that ain't the route they can take anymore. So these are the things that push me toward rationality in an arrogant way, in an argumentative, all or nothing way. And whether that's good or bad, it doesn't matter. That's just simply how it unfolded for me, with me, in me, because of me. To preserve, to sustain, and to develop the me, the sense of me. To give articulation to the feelings that I had is to concretize them and to make them really real, out there, externally almost. This is what arguments do. And when we have these sorts of arguments and make life about them for ourselves, it's a way of concretizing ourselves, sustaining the sense of self, claiming that we are just a little bit more out in the world, just a little bit more real through knowledge. This worship of knowledge is a worship of the self. More than that, it's a sustaining of the self. And if the self isn't real, and let's not say it is or it isn't in this little bit here, let's just say if it isn't, how will we know if we're constantly and exclusively acting on behalf of sustaining the self? See, it's only through understanding the self that we can see whether or not the self is real. And if these bits of us wither away and die on the vine, then what's left? Perhaps what's left is the real. Perhaps what is exposed, what lies beneath, when the conscious puppet and the unconscious puppeteer have completely dissolved. Perhaps then truth, with a capital T, if such a thing exists, it will become the case of us. Because the false is no longer there. And if the false is the me, is the self, do I really want to hear that? Or do I want to keep rationalizing that away and rationalizing myself into existence? I cannot know until I have a moment of honest silence.